Hi there, I'm Spud, and it's now Wednesday in our typical week for a race crew during the season. Wednesday means getting the car dynoed and finishing any loose ends on the checklist. It also means getting the hauler loaded so our truck driver, Tony Sessions, can commence to driving on up to Michigan International Speedway. Tony's a hell of a guy. He was a great hauler driver for us, and he took good care of all the equipment and would usually put a pot of coffee on for me each morning at the track. So I was kind of fond of him for that. He was also my catch can man during the races when he was with Phoenix Racing. He's with the IndyCar team now. I got to bump into him last year one day at lunch when I was with Jeremy Clements Racing. We went to Wade's, which is a great comfort food kind of place in Spartanburg that opened up in 1947. And it's had a line of people waiting up to get in ever since. Anyway, we sat down, and there was Tony at the next table, not 3 feet from me. So we got to hug and catch up a little bit. About the only character flaw that Tony has is that he smothers his steaks with ketchup. Anyway, we'll let some of the shop guys worry about getting the hauler loaded and concentrate on getting the car on the dyno. This is a picture of Henry Caspers, who was known as Spook to all that loved him. Yours truly and Scott Fetker. Spook drove our cup hauler, and you'd be hard pressed to find someone who spoke ill about him, especially around us, because we'd whale the tar out of the guy. Scott was our shop foreman. I want to say he became foreman in 2005 or so. He was promoted from within, and he really stepped up to the plate. Scott did a great job running the fab shop there and juggling all the balls in the air as far as keeping stuff on schedule, and he did a good job leading the fab guys, which can be a lot like herding cats, even if you've got a great bunch of guys, which Phoenix Racing did. Anyway, Scott handled dynoing the cars each week. About the only time I'd get involved was if we were having an issue with the computer. I can't say for sure, but the guys who would have helped get the car strapped down would have probably been guys like Josh May and Josh Slater. You see that little white patch of hair there behind Josh May's ear? His sister April used to call him bird shit, and it took me forever to realize it was on account of that spot. Another guy who would most likely have helped was Robert Simmons. That's him on the right in this picture. That's Mark O'Donnell on the left, but he wasn't with us yet. Believe me, you'll hear about him in later videos. Robert was a Marine, so we called him Natural Born Killer, but you've never met a nicer fella in your life. Hell of a fabricator, too. So Phoenix Racing had a DynoJet chassis dyno. I can't find any photos of our dyno or our dyno room, so I'm going to have to rely on video and pictures I shot at JDM on account of they have a DynoJet too. The team I worked at my last season, Jeremy Clements Racing, they had a Mustang chassis dyno. The DynoJet is what is called an inertia dyno. The mass of the drum that the power tires sit on is known, and so the inertia of the drum is also known. The horsepower at the wheels is basically calculated by the rate at which the car accelerates the drum. That's it. The inertia of the drum is known, the rate of acceleration is the variable. The only thing you can change on the DynoJet pretty much is the correction factor for the weather. It's very repeatable, very consistent, and very accurate comparison of the results from one week to the next. I'd like to point out too that the dyno that NASCAR would occasionally bring to the races was a DynoJet as well. So you could kind of compare apples to apples if you were one of the folks chosen to get on that dyno. Now let's compare that to the Mustang Dyno. It's what is known as an eddy current dyno. Essentially, it applies a retarding force in the eddy current brake that puts a load on the roller that the vehicle must overcome. There's quite a few variables that you need to input on the load profile to calculate what that load should be. And that's the rub for me. Don't get me wrong, the Mustang Dyno is a quality product. But if the operator doesn't input the right numbers for those variables, it can really skew the results. There's a really good video on YouTube where the dyno folks stick a Nissan Sentra on the chassis dyno, do a baseline run and see around 160 horsepower. And then tell you their next run is with a supercharger, a custom intake and exhaust, and they see 410 horsepower. Next they tell you that they're running a built engine with high compression pistons, and now they're seeing 660 horse. Then they explain that in reality, the car never left the dyno and they made absolutely no modifications to the motor. All they did was manipulate the input data. I'm going to include a link to that video in the description box. You see the potential problem here? If that guy running the dyno test ain't the sharpest knife in the drawer, or perhaps he's prone to not caring and is cool with taking shortcuts, you could be getting garbage results from one week to the next. You can't compare them numbers. This is why I prefer the DynoJet for a race shop. Anyway, it's time to head out to JDM and watch a dyno test. Chassis dyno at JDM is in what we call the healing room. I know. What the heck is a healing room? Well, let's say a part on a car goes NFG. We replace it, but instead of chucking it in the trash, we put it on a shelf in the healing room. So a few weeks later, the same part takes a dump on a different car, and now it turns out we don't have another replacement. Well, we go and grab the first one off the shelf in the healing room in hopes that the racing elves have come and fixed it as it sat there. It's kind of like putting all your faith in the lottery ticket you just bought, and it's just about as statistically probable as the chances of hitting on that ticket and being able to go into work, flip off your boss, and live out the rest of your days in luxury and leisure. The business end of the dyno at JDM is actually located outside. There's a lot of smoke and heat and noise when you're on the dyno, and this helps mitigate all of that. We're lucky to be out in the country and don't get complaints about the noise. My little house was only a couple of miles from our shop at Phoenix Racing, and I remember running home to get something during one dyno test, and I was amazed at how loud the car was during a run, even at that distance. Now remember, our dyno at Phoenix Racing had a room all to itself. So when I say loud, I'm talking even with the door pulled down. Another thing we had at Phoenix Racing was a pit in front of the dyno. That made it possible to leave the car in place and still swap out an exhaust, or change a driveline, or even change a tranny or a gear. At JDM, we have to unstrap the car, roll it forward, and put it up on jack stands to do something like that. So the car is all together, and Curtis Davis is just finishing buttoning up the motor. Curtis is Johnny's son, and he's also the shop foreman. He drove back in the day too. He's been heating the engine oil up for about 15 minutes or so. That's the thermostat / controller on the roof. It's connected to 2 heat probes that are located down in the dry sump tank. The guys have put the dyno tires on the rear. Every team has a pair of rear dyno tires. JDM's are a pair of 2 left side speedway tires. Why 2 left sides? Well, that's so the rollout of both tires is the same. Except for road course tires, the right side tires have a bigger circumference than the left sides. That's what we call stagger, and it helps the car turn. But you don't want that on the dyno, because the car will just keep trying to walk off the roller. You'll notice that even though the tires are both left sides, we've still marked this one as the right rear. You want to eliminate as many variables as you can on the dyno so that your results are consistent and comparable. So I always put the tires on the same sides of the car for each test. Next, K-Dog is going to remove the oil pump belt and spin the pump over with a right angle drill. This primes the entire oiling system with nice hot oil. You just got to remember to put that belt back on the pump. Once he's done priming the oil, Curtis will give the motor a quick once over and then climb in and start the car. He's wanting to make sure that all the gauges work, that the oil and fuel pressures are where they're supposed to be, etc. He'll also stick the car in gear, both forward and reverse, and make sure that's okay too. Better to do that all here before you roll back on the dyno, only to find out you've got a problem and you've got to roll it back into the shop. Let's take this car for example. She didn't light right off, which isn't all that uncommon. You know, a lot of times you're not getting enough gas through the carb yet. But then the second time, Curtis tried, the starter turned over pretty darn slow. And we thought maybe we had a dead battery. But that didn't turn out to be the case. But the tranny that was in the car, it had arrived at the shop with the linkage not mounted, and so Curtis had to bolt all that stuff on, and when he was trying to get it in gear, it was a real struggle, and it turned out he had to adjust the length of the rod for first a half a turn, and then it, you know, would pop right in. But like I said, better, you know, in the shop here, you know, up on the jack stands, instead of finding that out when he was actually trying to make a pull on the dyno. Okay, everything is checked out. She's full of gas and she's all bridled and saddled and ready to go. So it's time to grab a bunch of guys and push her into the next room and onto the dyno and strap her down.
I only move so fast.
I imagine that this is as good a time as any to ask you to hook a brother up, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel. That gizmo mounted behind the roller is how we locate the car in the same place for every test. You roll the car back, get some straps hooked up to the front, cinch them just a whisker, and then you tighten the straps in the rear until you've got a finger thickness between the tire and said gizmo. And then once you got the back strap down, you're able to flip that sucker out of the way, you know, so it won't interfere with the tire. This was the Portland road course car, hence the mud flaps. Had to get that mud flap out of there before we got the back strap down. The first time we ever had to run them, I put Yosemite Sam back off decals on them. But Pee Wee Covell, the NASCAR official and one of the few left from way back in the day, said Ixnay on the Ecals day. Poor old Spud can't have nothing. Curtis is now strapping down the back. We run 2 straps straight back and 2 on the diagonal to help prevent the car from being able to move from side to side. You got to be careful how you route those things too. You want to have a nice straight clean pull. You don't want it, binding up on something under the car. We don't get to run near the skew in the rear end that we used to, either by having the rear end pushed back more on one side or because of the asymmetrical toe that we used to have built into the rear ends. But you still have to kind of walk the drum when you first put the car up there and let it find its happy spot, the rear end, let the car move around a little bit and find its happy spot on the drum before you start strapping. You can see that Curtis is checking the distance between the tire and that locating jig with his finger just to make sure we're where we want to be on the drum.
Really tell the cameras in the wheels, road course versus oval too.
Yeah.
How they leaned in.
That's the O2 sensor that Curtis is stuck in the tailpipe. That's so he can make sure that the stoichiometry or air-fuel ratio of the carburetor is correct. He'll be able to see that number, on the computer screen as he's running the car.
So do you need me or is it jet spud?
Well, they got rubber in here. They must not have got them taped off fast enough last week.
Now Curtis is hooking up hoses to the cooling system. We run water through the radiator during the tests to keep the engine at the same temperature, again for consistency from one run to the next. There's a handle attached to a valve that Curtis can reach from inside the car to control the flow of water. We'll be running a big old floor fan through the grill opening too for, the same reason. I'm going to mostly keep silent from here on in and let you watch the dyno test. K-Dog will be explaining things every now and again, and even though I said I'm going to keep quiet, we all know damn well that there ain't much chance of that actually happening.
Now we're going to warm it up, get it up to operating temperature. And then I'm going to check the oil level, and I'm going to check the timing before we make any blast full powered runs. This is the switch I hit to make a sample run, to end the sample run, and the red is to put the brakes on the drum, to slow it down to make another power run from 5,000 RPM to 8,400 RPM. And these I have to hook to the coil so that it picks up the tack so I can watch the tack on the computer screen.
And what's that handle by your right elbow do?
Alright, this right here is my water pressure right now. Got it about 27 psi, the system running through the car. And because we're going to make 5 power runs, I'll have to cool the water down. We'll get essentially around 200 mile per hour with the gear that we have in here today, a 422 rear gear for Portland. And we can't just make power run back to back like that, so it'll kind of help keep the motor cool around 180 degrees of water temp, try to keep the oil temp right around that, and try to keep a baseline from start to finish of 180 water, 180 oil. But the oil will heat up a little bit to around 200.
Yeah. But by trying to keep the water and oil temps as close to the same as possible, you're able to compare apples to apples.
Yes, and then we'll run fans. Turn them on for the radiator, kind of let some air blow through the radiator ductwork and simulate a little bit on the track. And then after we check the oil level and the timing of the engine, then I'll put the cow induction system down so it has the same temperature year round, pumping over into the air box. If it's a hot, humid day, if it's 70 degrees up front, full of air from up front of our shop, it's 70 degrees in the winter up front, year round the same temperature going in our cold air box.
You normally start off with 5 gallons when you put the motor in, right?
Yeah, and with the oil tank that's in the car, I need to land about 19 and a half to be right for what PCR wants us to run oil level wise.
Yeah.
So this is Patrick Gallagher's car for Portland, Oregon,
Yeah.
JDM Xfinity this week. While I'm in there dynoing, I'm looking at all the gauges. I'm looking at the fuel pressure gauge to make sure the fuel pressure staying where it needs to be throughout the whole run. Usually it drops about a half to 3/4 of a pound. So if it starts out at 10 psi, let's say at around 4,800, you know, I like for it to be around 9.5 at the 8,500 RPM range. I'm also watching the oil temperature, make sure everything's working properly, making sure the gauges are working properly. I'm looking at the water temp, keeping it regulated, which we can't other than tape either on the nose or off the nose at the track. But doing what we're doing here today, you know, I'm looking to make sure we have no leaks, make sure no vibrations, make sure the transmission's working and going in gear properly for the driver.
Yeah.
Making sure it's smooth is another thing, you know, and this car was very smooth. We got a different training in this week and it did very exceptionally well.
You five runs is pretty much typical.
Yes.
Unless say it's like Daytona or Talladega where you're messing with the carb, you know, just really trying to super dial everything in.
Yeah, 5 runs is real typical. You know, we've done had our carburetors jetted for road course. I had to put the road course bowls on, you know, and got all that swapped over. The timing, when you saw me check it, I set the timing at 33 degrees, what ECR had on the motor plate for it to be set at. The oil level was at 19.5 where ECR wanted me to run it at for the 5 gallon for our oil system of our radiator, our oil tank and their engine that we own. So everything worked out really great. I'm very happy with the way it all went here today. And I feel like Patrick's going to have a good shot at doing it, performing well here this weekend at Portland, Oregon.
Well, that's good. I see you're just running 1 ignition box.
Yeah, just 1 ignition box. We don't have a double ignition in this car. Some cars have 2, some cars have 1. But this road course car, when we had bought it years ago from Turner when they went out of business, it only had 1 ignition box. So it's had the same box since 2013.
Is the timing, like if you're running 2 boxes, is the timing usually the same in each box? Or?
Not always. I have seen a whole degree different. I have seen 2 degrees different. You know, that's one thing I always do. If there's 2 ignitions in the car, ignition boxes, I check it on both boxes to make sure, because if one has a little bit more, a little bit less, I always let the crew chief know so that he can let the driver know. And sometimes it may make a tick more power with a little more timing, and we might qualify on that, but we can't race it because it can burn down the motor.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Curtis. I'm hoping the folks are learning something here today.
Yeah, I hope so too, and thank y'all for tuning in. Hit like and subscribe, get the word out. Spud's going to start doing this weekly, and we're going to try to show y'all what happens at JDM, what Spud's did all his life, what I've did all my life for 30 years of my 43 years living, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So tune in, hit like and subscribe, and thumbs up.
Thank you.